Amber's laughter cut through the hum of lunchtime chatter. The kind that didn't reach her eyes. Polished, practiced. She hovered over a table of suits, topping off glasses, promising, "Our signature chili is divine." The door opened. A frail old man stepped in, clutching a faded voucher like it was hope itself. His coat was worn thin, his shoes dusted with road miles. Amber's smile dropped. Her voice, sharp enough to slice through the room, "If you can't afford a burger, maybe you shouldn't eat here." Laughter rippled from the nearby tables, light and cruel. Walter Kane's hand trembled as he set the coupon down, head bowed. Across the room, a man in a gray shirt paused mid-bite, spoon shaking. Harlan Reeves, disguised as Hal, watched in silence. The warmth of the chili on his tongue turned to ash. He said nothing, just stared at the scene that would change everything. The office was quiet, lined with photographs of beginnings. Harlan, in his 20s, hair dark, sleeves rolled, standing over a dented pot of chili. That pot had fed his neighbors once, back when kindness was currency. Now the frames looked more like memorials than memories. On his desk lay a folder thick with complaints. Staff dismissive, felt unwelcome, cold service. He read each line slowly, the words pressing down heavier than numbers on a balance sheet. Somewhere between expansion plans and profit margins, the warmth had gone missing. He leaned back, staring at his reflection in the window, a man successful enough to forget his own recipe for compassion. "Maybe I built something big," he murmured, "but not something good." The thought settled like frost. He closed the folder, exhaled once, and looked toward the door. The decision formed not from anger, but from ache. If the soul of Hartman's had been lost, he would have to walk the floors himself to find it again. Mark stood near the door, puzzled by the request. A gray shirt, old jeans. Why the disguise? Harlan's hands moved calmly as he buttoned the shirt. "Because the truth doesn't speak to suits," he said. "It whispers in the kitchen." Mark hesitated. "You're sure about this?" Harlan nodded. "If I want to understand them, I need to sweat beside them." The mirror caught a stranger's reflection. Unshaven, ordinary, almost invisible. Perfect. He handed Mark a sealed envelope. "Only HR gets this. No one else knows." Mark looked uneasy, but Harlan's tone left no space for argument. "This isn't an inspection," he said quietly. "It's a confession in disguise." With that, he left the office, his footsteps steady, his purpose set, trading titles for truth. The car rolled past familiar streets until the first sign came into view. Hartman's Grill, founded 1994. The paint had faded, but the promise behind it still tugged at him. He remembered his mother's kitchen, the smell of slow-cooked beans, the way she ladled chili into 2 bowls and handed one to the neighbor who had nothing to eat. "We feed people, not pride," she used to say. He whispered it now, almost prayer-like. "We used to be different." The memory flickered away as the car slowed. Ahead stood the flagship branch, gleaming, modern, efficient, and heartless in its perfection. Harlan straightened his cap, felt the coarseness of the old fabric between his fingers, and stepped out. The man who once built an empire was gone. What remained was a stranger walking toward the door, carrying nothing but memory and the need to make things right. Harlan stepped out of the car, pulling the brim of his cap low. The midday sun hit the glass front of Hartman's Grill, a reflection of everything he once built and no longer recognized. Outside, a short line formed at the door. 2 men in suits were ushered in quickly. Behind them, a young mother with a stroller waited, holding a child against her hip. "We just want a quick meal," she said softly. Amber's voice carried from the entrance, clipped and sharp. "Rules are rules. No reservation, no table." The woman turned away, murmuring an apology to a toddler who didn't understand rejection. Harlan's jaw tightened. The policy had been made to manage crowds, not to divide them. He didn't speak. He only watched, the way smiles bent for money and vanished for need. Inside, laughter and polished forks filled the air. Outside, hunger waited behind glass. Harlan finally understood. His business had learned efficiency but forgotten grace. The restroom mirror gave back a stranger. Gray cap, uneven beard, tired eyes that once commanded rooms. Harlan studied the reflection, wondering if any of his employees would even recognize the man who started it all. For years, people had opened doors for him before he reached them. Now, no one looked twice. Power had always spoken loud. Humility, it seemed, had no voice. He turned on the tap, the water cold against his palms, grounding him in reality. This was no longer observation from the top. It was entry into a forgotten world. He inhaled, slow and deep, then wiped his hands dry. The mirror fogged slightly, blurring the line between who he was and who he pretended to be. When he stepped out, the door swung shut behind him, sealing that old life away. Amber's laugh carried over the hum of conversation. She hovered near a table of executives, listing dishes as if describing art. "Our chili," she purred, "is for refined tastes, slow-cooked for those who appreciate the difference." The men smiled, flattered. At that moment, Harlan entered. The shift was instant. Her charm vanished, replaced by impatience. She looked him up and down, saw the faded jeans and calloused hands. "Promo seats," she said flatly, nodding toward the back. "Menus limited." He didn't respond, just took the wrinkled menu and moved past her. Behind him, she returned to her polished smile, voice sweet again. Harlan sat near the kitchen door where the smell of disinfectant overpowered the scent of food. He unfolded the creased paper, reading words that once meant pride. Hartman's signature chili. It used to symbolize warmth, welcome. Now it was just another product sold to those deemed refined. Something inside him shifted. Not anger yet, but the sting of recognition. Lena approached quietly, balancing a tray with practiced grace. Her smile wasn't polished, it was genuine, the kind that softened a tired day. "Welcome to Hartman's," she said, setting down a glass of water before Harlan could ask. He looked up. "Chili here, any good?" "Depends on who makes it," she replied with a small shrug. "Some of us still care." Her words were simple, but they lingered. In a place where courtesy felt rehearsed, her tone carried warmth untrained. Harlan studied her for a moment. The faint lines of exhaustion under her eyes, the quick glance she gave to make sure every table had what it needed. There was kindness here, quiet and unadvertised, trying to survive beneath layers of rules and hierarchy. When she turned away, the room felt different, lighter by something invisible. For the first time since stepping inside, Harlan didn't feel disgust. He felt a flicker of hope. From his corner, Harlan watched the restaurant move like a hierarchy in motion. Amber drifted between tables of suits, her voice bright and calculated. The moment she passed a man in work boots, her tone dimmed, her smile vanished. Behind her, Riley struggled with a tray stacked too high. When a cup rattled, Amber snapped, "Move faster or I'll report you." The boy nodded, cheeks burning. Across the aisle, Lena knelt beside a small girl sitting with her mother, sliding an extra roll of bread onto the plate. "No charge," she whispered like a secret. The child grinned. Harlan opened his small notebook, the same one he used for board meetings. He wrote just one line. "Lena. Compassion still exists." Then he closed it, not out of satisfaction, but a quiet ache. Inside this polished room, 3 kinds of people were working: the cruel, the silent, and the good, and all of them carried his company's name. Later, near the service counter, Amber leaned toward Lena, her tone dipped in disdain. "You're too soft," she said. "This is a business, not a shelter." Lena wiped her hands on her apron. "Sometimes being kind is good business." Amber scoffed, flipping her hair. "Not in this place." The words hit harder than they should have. Harlan, sitting within earshot, felt them like an accusation. He'd built this place on fairness, not fear, But somewhere along the line, people like Amber had rewritten the culture, turning empathy into weakness. Lena stayed silent, unwilling to argue. Amber walked off, heels sharp against the tile, leaving behind an echo of everything Hartman's had become. Harlan's gaze fell to his half-eaten chili, the same dish his mother once served to strangers for free. The taste no longer reminded him of home. It reminded him of loss. The lunch rush quieted into a steady rhythm of chatter and clinking plates. A man in a tailored jacket waved a $50 bill toward Amber, smirking. "Best service I've had all week," he said. Amber's laughter rang out as she pocketed the tip, loud enough for everyone to hear. "See, that's how you treat quality," she told Riley, who passed by carrying a tray stacked with glasses. A moment later, water spilled across the floor. Riley froze, mortified. Amber turned, voice sharp and public. "You can't even hold a tray?" Customers turned to watch. Riley mumbled an apology, kneeling to clean up. Before Amber could add more, Lena knelt beside him, wiping the floor with a towel. "It's okay," she said gently. "Everyone slips sometimes." Harlan sat in silence, watching the scene unfold. Amber basked in attention, Riley shrank, and Lena carried quiet grace no policy could teach. He took out his notebook again, hand steady this time. What he saw wasn't a bad day. It was a pattern, the kind of rot that doesn't show on balance sheets but eats through the walls just the same. Evening settled in, the clatter replaced by the hum of closing shifts. Lena wiped the counter beside Amber, her tone soft but weighted. "You ever think about why this place was built?" Amber didn't look up. "To make money, obviously. What else?" Lena paused. "To feed people. That's what Mr. Reeves said when he opened it." Amber laughed. "Feed people, make money. It's the same thing if you're smart." Harlan stood in the hallway, hidden from sight but not from the sting of her words. Each syllable cut deeper than anger could. Somewhere along the way, ambition had turned into arrogance, and his name hung above a door that welcomed the wealthy but turned away the hungry. Lena glanced toward the reflection in the glass, catching Harlan's outline behind her without realizing who he was. He turned away before she could speak. The truth didn't need to be announced. It had already been revealed in what they believed. The restaurant was nearly empty when Harlan stood to leave. The same table where Walter Kane had sat earlier still bore faint impressions of his hands, a ghost of humiliation left behind. The light above flickered, dim and uneven, just like the warmth of the place itself. Harlan walked over and rested his palm on the chair's back. For a moment he imagined the old man's silence, the weight of pride breaking under laughter. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his notebook, and tore a small sheet. On it, he wrote 5 words. Empathy test. Failed. Immediate review. He folded the note and placed it neatly under the salt shaker. No one would see it tonight, but someone would find it. Maybe Lena, maybe Riley. But whoever did would know a reckoning was coming. As he stepped outside, the night air felt colder than before. Behind him, the sign glowed faintly. Everyone's welcome. The words no longer sounded true. Harlan didn't look back. He didn't need to. The test had already begun. The next day, Harlan returned and took the same seat by the wall, the one where the air always felt colder. The lunch rush began again. Identical laughter, the same practiced smiles. It was as if the day before had been erased. Then the door opened and Walter Kane stepped in, holding another voucher like a quiet act of faith. His clothes were pressed but worn, his steps hesitant. Amber spotted him instantly, her expression tightening. "You again," she said, loud enough to turn heads. The old man nodded politely. "Just 1 bowl of chili, please." Amber sighed as if patience were too expensive to spare. She looked toward the back. "We're full. Takeout only." Harlan set down his spoon, watching the scene unfold like a repeated wound. The same words, the same dismissal, replayed as if the universe were testing how much cruelty he could stomach. This wasn't a random slip in service, it was culture. polished contempt served daily. He didn't move yet, but his silence had changed. It wasn't passive anymore. It was the kind that gathered weight before a storm. Walter hesitated, still standing at the counter. "My wife, she used to love the chili here," he said softly, eyes on the floor. Amber's lips curled into a smirk. Then maybe that's why she left. The sentence cracked the air. Plates stopped clinking. Riley froze mid-step. A glass slipped, shattering near his feet. Lena's face went pale, her mouth half open, but no words came. Harlan felt something in him twist, the kind of anger that doesn't shout, it constricts. His hand tightened around the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. Walter blinked hard, fighting the weight of humiliation, then turned for the door. The sound of the bell above it rang once, small and final. Amber rolled her eyes, muttering, "Some people just can't take a joke." It wasn't a joke. It was the moment the mask fell completely. Harlan didn't taste his meal anymore. He was measuring the distance between silence and action, and it was shrinking fast. Walter shuffled toward the exit, his shoulders sinking with each step. "Sir, wait," Lena called, but he didn't. He only raised a trembling hand as if waving off the world. Amber sighed dramatically. "Don't waste time on him, Lena. He's not coming back." Harlan pushed his chair back. The scrape against the tile cut through the chatter. He stood, calm on the surface, but his eyes carried the weight of something about to break. For days, he had watched and noted, hoping observation could change what authority hadn't. But the time for watching had expired. He picked up his cap, adjusted it slightly, and walked toward the door without a word. Behind him, Lena stared, sensing something had shifted, but not knowing what. Outside, the wind was sharp. Harlan looked up at the restaurant's sign, "Everyone's welcome," and felt the lie burn brighter than the sun above it. For the first time, he didn't just feel disappointment. He felt responsibility, and that was enough to move him. In the parking lot, Harlan stood beside his truck, the afternoon sun throwing hard light across the asphalt. He dialed Mark without hesitation. "I need every camera feed from today's lunch service," he said. His voice carried none of the softness people knew him for. Mark hesitated. "Is everything okay?" "No," Harlan replied. "Prepare a meeting for tomorrow. Quietly. No one from staff gets a hint." There was a silence on the line before Mark answered, "Understood." Harlan ended the call and looked back at the restaurant. Through the glass he could see Amber laughing, already moving on, unaware that the clock had started ticking on her own undoing. His reflection in the window looked older, sharper, like the version of himself he'd promised never to become. The choice was made. Observation was over. The evidence would speak louder than any warning he'd ever given. Inside, the air was still thick with arrogance. Outside, justice began to gather shape. Evening shadows stretched long across the streets. At the bus stop, Walter Kane sat quietly on the bench, holding his voucher like a reminder of what dignity used to feel like. Lena appeared, a small paper box in her hands. "Please eat," she said gently, setting it beside him. "It's on me." Walter blinked, unsure if kindness was meant for him anymore. "Not everyone forgets," he murmured, his voice rough from holding too much silence. "You're proof of that." From across the street, Harlan watched unseen. He'd followed not out of suspicion but need, to know whether goodness still lived anywhere inside his walls. Watching Lena crouched beside Walter, smiling as though the world were simple again, he felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't step forward, he didn't interrupt. Some truths proved themselves without witnesses, but tonight he was one, and it was enough to remind him what the company was supposed to stand for. Back in his car, the city fading into dusk, Harlan opened his notebook. The page was half filled from earlier notes. He added 2 new lines. Amber, cruelty rooted. Lena, hope remains. He underlined the second once, the first twice. Through the windshield he could still see the restaurant's warm lights flickering inside. Amber's laughter drifted faintly through the glass as she joked with a bartender, carefree, as though nothing had happened, not a trace of regret. Harlan closed the notebook slowly. There was no anger left, only certainty. The problem wasn't a bad employee. It was a system that rewarded indifference and mocked grace. He sat there until the lights dimmed, the parking lot empty. Then he whispered to no one, "Tomorrow, they'll remember what this place was built for." And for the first time in years, his resolve felt colder than the night around him. The restaurant lights went dark one by one, leaving the sign above to glow alone in the night. "Everyone's welcome." The words flickered faintly, humming like a lie that refused to die. Harlan stood on the sidewalk, coat pulled tight, watching his own reflection shimmer against the glass door. He whispered the phrase under his breath, testing it, feeling how wrong it sounded now. Not anymore. It wasn't anger that filled him, just a hollow sadness, sharp and deliberate. Somewhere between success and scale, that simple promise had been traded for polish. He had built walls instead of warmth, and his name hung on all of them. He took one last look through the window. Inside, chairs were stacked, the floor gleamed, everything perfect, except the spirit. The place looked clean but empty, efficient but cold. Harlan turned away, the glow of the sign fading behind him. Tomorrow it would either mean something again or be taken down for good. Tonight it stood as a confession written in light. Morning came heavy with routine. Staff gathered in the dining area, murmuring among themselves. No music, no laughter, just the uneasy shuffle of feet. A notice had gone out for an emergency meeting, but no one knew why. Amber leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Probably another boring announcement about policy," she said, smirking. "Maybe new uniforms." Riley kept glancing toward the door, sensing something larger, while Lena stayed quiet, her gut tight with the kind of silence that comes before change. Diana Holt, the shift manager, stood stiffly near the host stand, expression unreadable. A clipboard trembled slightly in her hands. She knew more than the others and wished she didn't. The sound of footsteps approached from the hall, steady, measured, unfamiliar in their weight. Conversations died mid-sentence. The clock ticked louder than it should have. None of them realized yet that this was the last morning they'd see their workplace as it was. The door swung open, and Hal Reed walked in, his gray cap shadowing his eyes. Diana followed closely, her lips pressed thin. Amber groaned. "Why's he here again? We're closed." No one answered. The man stopped in the center of the room, surveying every face. Lena's brows furrowed. Something about his stillness didn't fit the timid customer she'd served. Harlan reached up and removed his cap. The motion was quiet, but seismic. The disguise fell away with it. The careful stubble, the slouch in his shoulders, the meekness in his voice, all gone. What stood before them wasn't Hal anymore. It was Harlan Reeves, founder and owner of Hartman's Grill. The room froze. A fork clattered onto the floor somewhere near the back. Amber's smirk dissolved as color drained from her face. Riley stood straighter, eyes wide. Harlan looked at them, his voice calm but heavy with disappointment. "Let's talk about what really happened here yesterday." No one dared breathe. The storm had arrived, and it wore the face of their boss. Silence stretched thin as Harlan stood before them, the truth settling like dust. He looked each of them in the eye before speaking, his voice low but absolute. "My name isn't Hal," he said. "It's Harlan Reeves." The words hit like a breaking glass. Amber's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Diana's clipboard slipped slightly in her hands. She didn't pick it up. Lena blinked hard, her breath catching, disbelief tangled with a dawning recognition. Harlan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority didn't shout. It simply arrived. The same man they'd ignored, dismissed, and judged now stood revealed as the one who signed their checks and built their world. He turned to the others. "Yesterday wasn't just a bad shift," he said. "It was a mirror. No one moved. Even the air felt suspended." Amber's confident smirk was gone, replaced by something small and frightened. Lena's eyes glistened, not from fear, but from relief that someone had finally seen. The power dynamic flipped in a heartbeat. The room that once belonged to Amber's charm now belonged to truth. Harlan's tone hardened. "Play the footage." Diana hesitated, but he repeated, quieter, "Now." The monitor came to life. The grainy video showed Walter Kane standing at the counter, holding his voucher. Amber's voice filled the room again, every cruel syllable echoing through the speakers. "If you can't afford a burger, maybe you shouldn't eat here." Then the laughter. Then Walter's bowed head. No one breathed. Riley's eyes dropped to the floor. Lena covered her mouth. Amber stared at the screen, willing it to stop, but the image lingered. "It was—" she started, her voice trembling. "It was a misunderstanding." Harlan cut her off. No, it was humiliation. The words carried the weight of a verdict, the kind that didn't need a gavel, just conscience. He turned to the staff. "This isn't who we are, or at least it wasn't supposed to be." Amber's eyes darted around for support. There was none. Even Diana looked away. The evidence spoke with a clarity no apology could reach. Amber's voice cracked as she stepped forward. "I'm sorry," she said, tears blurring her mascara. "I didn't mean—" Harlan's stare stopped her cold. "You didn't fail this company," he said. "You failed humanity." The room went still again. His tone wasn't cruel. It was disappointed, the kind that leaves deeper scars than anger ever could. He turned to Diana. "You're the manager. You saw it happen, and you allowed it." Diana's throat tightened. "I thought it was just attitude. I didn't want to cause drama." Harlan nodded once, the gesture slow and deliberate. "That's how rot spreads. Not through action, but silence." Amber began to sob, her apology lost under the weight of his words. Riley shifted uneasily, guilt flashing across his face. Lena kept her gaze low, the only one who still looked steady. Harlan's disappointment filled the room like gravity. "This place was meant to serve people, not pride," he said. "If that's forgotten, then everything we've built means nothing." No one argued. No one defended themselves. The reckoning had already arrived. All that was left was silence and shame. Harlan let the silence linger a moment longer before speaking. "Amber," he said evenly, "you're dismissed from this branch, effective immediately." Her head snapped up. "What? You're firing me?" "Yes," he replied, "but you'll still receive your full pay for the month." Confusion flickered across her face. "Why?" Harlan met her eyes without anger. "Because mercy is part of respect. I won't take away your dignity, even if you refuse to give it to others." Amber's mouth opened, then closed again. Tears threatened but never quite fell. Around her, no one dared speak. The message wasn't only for her, it was for all of them. He folded his arms. "Learn from this. Money can't buy decency, but it can cost it." She nodded weakly, picking up her apron. For the first time, she didn't have a retort. As she walked out, the air felt lighter, not from satisfaction, but relief. Harlan turned to the rest of the team. "We start over from here, all of us." What had been a scene of judgment now shifted into something quieter. A restoration, not revenge. After the meeting, Lena lingered near the door until the room cleared. She approached Harlan with hesitant gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing them what this place was supposed to be." Harlan looked at her, the corners of his mouth easing into something close to a smile. "No," he said. "Thank you. You reminded me why I built it in the first place." Lena shook her head. "I just tried to do my job." He nodded. And that's what makes it matter. Doing the right thing when no one's watching. For a brief moment, the formality between them disappeared. It wasn't a boss and an employee. It was two people trying to rebuild something worth believing in. Lena straightened her apron, a quiet determination in her eyes. "We'll make it better," she said. Harlan's voice dropped, steady and certain. "We already are." Later that afternoon, Harlan found Riley stacking boxes in the back, shoulders tense. "You okay?" he asked. Riley nodded quickly, avoiding his gaze. "Yes, sir." Harlan leaned against the counter. "Why didn't you speak up when you saw what was happening?" Riley hesitated, fingers tightening on the tape dispenser. "Because here," he said quietly, "kindness gets punished." The honesty stung more than defiance ever could. Harlan stepped closer, resting a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Not anymore." Riley finally looked up, uncertainty giving way to cautious hope. "You really mean that?" "I do," Harlan said, "and you'll help me prove it." The words didn't sound like a command. They sounded like trust. Riley straightened, a faint smile breaking through. In that simple exchange, the atmosphere began to shift. Fear gave way to resolve, and for the first time, the walls of Hartman's felt like they might hold something human again. The restaurant was silent after closing. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed to a quiet glow. Harlan sat alone at a corner table, the same one where he had first watched everything fall apart. His notebook lay open before him, blank except for the faint marks of earlier battles. He uncapped his pen and began to write. Slow, deliberate strokes that felt more like vows than notes. No guest too small. No meal too humble. No kindness wasted. He paused, then turned to an earlier page, the one labeled Empathy Test. Failed. The ink had dried long ago, but the shame still felt fresh. He drew a single line through it, not to erase, but to move forward. From outside, the neon sign glowed through the glass. Everyone's welcome. For the first time, the words didn't sting. They reflected against the table, warm and honest. Harlan leaned back, closing the notebook. Tomorrow, he'd make those lines policy. Not as a gesture of charity, but as a promise kept. The next morning, the company hall filled with hundreds of employees. No stage lights, no fanfare, just the founder standing where everyone could see him. Harlan didn't take the microphone. He didn't need to. His voice carried through the room on conviction alone. "I grew up hungry," he began. "There was a night I had nothing to eat until a stranger handed me a bowl of chili. I never forgot that." He looked out at the crowd. Young faces, tired faces, people who'd built their own stories inside his brand. Somewhere along the way, we got comfortable. We stopped seeing the people we served. That ends today. He announced the new initiative. Dignity Meals. Every branch, 3 free meals a day for those who couldn't afford one. No questions asked, no judgment given. The room erupted in whispers. Some stunned, some moved. Lena wiped her eyes. For the first time in years, applause felt earned. Not for profit, but for purpose. After the meeting, Harlan called Lena and Riley into his office. The air still held the echo of applause, but his tone was calm, personal. "You two reminded me what this place was built on," he said. He handed Lena an envelope. Inside, her promotion letter, Assistant Manager. "I thought people like me don't get noticed," she said, voice trembling. Harlan smiled faintly. "You were the only one who did notice." Turning to Riley, he passed him a folder. "A scholarship for hospitality training. You'll study, then come back and lead." Riley blinked, stunned. "I don't even know what to say." "Just keep being decent," Harlan replied. "That's leadership." The moment was quiet but profound, the kind that rewrites how people see themselves. Lena held her letter like something sacred. Riley stood taller than before. For once, reward didn't feel like hierarchy. It felt like justice delivered in the smallest, most human way possible. The hum of the restaurant sounded different now. Lighter, almost musical. Harlan stood near the counter with Lena, watching her guide a pair of new hires. "When you greet someone," she said, her tone warm but sure, "don't just say welcome. Say, welcome home." The young employees exchanged a smile, trying it out on the next guest who walked in. The words felt strange at first, then right. The guest smiled back. At the far tables, Riley cleared plates with an easy rhythm, humming under his breath. The nervous glances that once filled his days were gone. He moved freely now, proud to belong to a place that finally meant something again. The laughter coming from the kitchen wasn't forced anymore. It carried sincerity, the kind that seeps into the air and lingers. Harlan took it in quietly, the way a man might admire a garden that had grown back after a storm. This wasn't perfection. It was progress. And for the first time in a long time, Hartman's Grill didn't feel like a brand. It felt like family. Outside, the afternoon light caught a familiar figure standing near the door. Amber. Her hair tied back, her uniform replaced by a plain jacket. She didn't step inside, just watched through the glass. Inside, Lena leaned over a table, laughing gently as she handed a bowl of chili to Walter Kane. The old man smiled back, the warmth of the room wrapping around him like something long lost and found again. Amber's eyes softened. No bitterness, no excuses, just quiet recognition of the space she once ruled and now couldn't enter. Her reflection overlapped with Lena's in the glass for a moment, then slipped away as she lowered her gaze. She turned and walked off down the sidewalk, head bowed but lighter than before. Some lessons didn't need witnesses or applause, they only needed acceptance. And in her silence, forgiveness finally took shape. The lunch rush had ended. Only a few guests remained when Walter Kane returned, stepping carefully to the same table where everything had started. This time, a steaming bowl of chili awaited him. No vouchers, no judgment. Harlan approached quietly and sat across from him. No introductions, no speeches, just two men and a simple meal. They ate without a word. Each spoonful carried something unspoken: regret, apology, gratitude. Walter's eyes glistened for a moment before he smiled faintly. Harlan nodded back, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. For all the noise that had once filled the place, arrogance, cruelty, pretense, this silence was louder. It was the kind of quiet that meant peace, not absence. When they finished, Harlan pushed the empty bowl forward. "Good chili," Walter said softly. "Better company," Harlan replied. No cameras, no audience, just a restored dignity shared between equals. In that moment, Hartman's Grill finally became what it was always meant to be. Ban change spread faster than Harlan expected. Within weeks, branches across the state began following the new policy. In downtown districts, waiters carried trays to park benches where homeless veterans sat with quiet disbelief. In smaller towns, children in worn coats laughed over free chili, their parents watching with gratitude too heavy for words. Every entrance bore the same small sign: "Dignity served here." It wasn't a slogan, it was a promise, handwritten first by Harlan himself. News outlets began to take notice. Headlines read, "Hartman's Grill redefines hospitality." Local stations aired stories of kindness multiplied, employees paying for extra meals, communities donating ingredients, strangers volunteering to help. But inside each store, it wasn't about publicity. It was about people finally recognizing the purpose behind the food they served. The culture that had once thrived on hierarchy was now built on humanity. For the first time since 1994, Hartman's wasn't just a restaurant chain. It was a movement. That evening, Harlan sat with a small group of new hires in the break room. The walls were covered with photos of guests and handwritten thank you notes. The room felt alive with meaning. He told them about 1994, the night he first opened his doors. "We had one pot of chili and two customers who couldn't pay," he said, "so I gave it to them anyway. That's how Hartman's started." Riley leaned forward. "Did you ever think it'd get this big?" Harlan smiled, lines deepening around his eyes. "I never wanted it big," he said. "I just wanted it right." The group sat quietly for a moment, the words settling like warmth. Growth wasn't what mattered. Integrity was. And in that silence they understood the weight of what they were now part of. Not a business, but a legacy of decency. The next morning, Lena stood before the staff bulletin board with a marker in hand. In bold, careful letters, she wrote, "Kindness is the new policy." The others gathered around, one by one, signing their names beneath it. Someone taped up a photo of a veteran smiling with a meal. Another added a picture of a child holding a paper cup of chili. Riley stepped forward last. Beneath the signatures, he scribbled a short phrase. Respect first. No applause followed, no speeches were made. Yet something shifted. A shared understanding that rules alone couldn't rebuild what had been lost. Only people could. As Harlan watched from a distance, he realized that culture didn't live in manuals or mission statements. It lived here, in handwriting, in actions, in the quiet pride of people who finally believed again. Weeks later, a single envelope arrived at the main office, addressed in neat handwriting. Inside, a short letter. "I was wrong. I learned that kindness is harder than cruelty, but it lasts longer. Amber Cole." Harlan read it slowly, the edges of the paper trembling slightly in his hands. No excuses, no defense, just truth. He smiled faintly, folded the letter, and placed it in his desk drawer beside an old photograph of his mother. Her smile in that photo carried the same message Amber had finally understood. The hardest lessons are the ones that make us human again. He closed the drawer gently, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. A small piece of redemption, quietly earned. Walter Kane returned to Hartman's one quiet afternoon. He approached the counter, placed a small silver coin beside the register, and looked at Lena. She frowned, puzzled. "What's this for?" Walter's eyes softened. "My wife used to say kindness never costs a dime," he said. "Thought I'd pay for mine anyway." Lena smiled, speechless. Harlan, standing nearby, caught the exchange and gave a quiet nod. The coin gleamed under the warm lights, worth almost nothing, but carrying more value than any bill. It stayed there by choice, not as payment, but as proof that decency, once given, always finds its way back. The restaurant buzzed with life, voices, laughter, the rhythm of plates and purpose. Lena greeted each guest with the same phrase, steady and warm. "Welcome home." Riley moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, every motion sure, every smile genuine. From his corner, Harlan watched, one hand resting on the sign above the door. "Everyone's welcome." He spoke softly, but the words carried weight. In business, the richest meal is respect. It feeds loyalty, dignity, and trust, and those never spoil. The crowd kept moving, unaware that the man watching had finally rebuilt more than a company. He'd restored its soul.